Hey everybody, it is Tuesday. Welcome to AP World History Modern. My name is Mason Logereau, coming to you from Pflugerville, Texas, in the Austin area. In fact, look, I'm even repping the P today for all my Panthers. And it is good to see y'all. Hope everybody's doing good. Everything's going well right here in Austin, except I need a haircut. And I know y'all can't see my hair because it's really short, but for me, this is really, really long and I need a haircut. And I don't know what to do about that right now, but hopefully we'll figure that out soon. All right, let's talk about what we're doing today. Today is Mongol Day. Now, I've been accused by some of my students in the past of possibly overhyping the importance of the Mongols in world history. But can I be honest? I don't think there's any way to overhype it because they are really that important. So we really need to focus today, though, especially on how they change the trade routes of Afro-Eurasia. So thinking about those trade routes that Smith talked with y'all yesterday about, the Silk Road, Indian Ocean trade, what do the Mongols end up doing with that? What are things that continue and stay the same? What are things that change, especially with those trade routes? Okay, so before we get into that, let's think about what you should already know. You should already know about the major government systems that we've been talking about the last week or so. So of course, you've got the Song dynasty in China. You've got those major caliphates in the Islamic world. You've got kind of feudalism system, kind of decentralized government in Europe. You should know about the major trade routes, like I said, that Smith talked about yesterday. Okay, you should know all that and you should be good, but then you got to realize that's all about to change because yes, the Mongols are about to mess everything up, okay? But we're going to go beyond just the whole Mongols killing a lot of people thing. We're really going to focus, like I said, on how they change these trade routes and how they change life and economics and governance in Afro-Eurasia. All right, before we do that, let's get into last night's homework that Smith gave you yesterday. Now, y'all were looking at a DBQ that actually, if you remember, on Friday, at the end of Friday's lesson, I gave you all that homework over the weekend where I said, come up with a thesis statement. And then for bonus points, come up with a couple of claims that you can make in this DBQ with these 5 documents. And so then last night, Smith had y'all write out those body paragraphs. So you should have written 2 body paragraphs, one for each of the 2 claims. Now, just a quick aside here. I know that a lot of teachers, including myself, tell students when they're writing an essay, you want 3 claims, 3 body paragraphs. And for a DBQ, that usually works really well. But let's not forget the changes to this year's test. It's only 45 minutes instead of the usual 60 minutes or so you get for a DBQ. There's only 5 documents as opposed to the usual 7. So for this year's DBQ, I think if you have 2 claims and 2 solid body paragraphs, I think you're in a pretty good spot. Don't feel like you have to stretch it out to 3. 2 should be fine for this. Okay, take a second, kind of read over what Smith wrote here as, again, a possible answer. This, if yours is not exactly like this, that's totally fine. Please, please, please make sure you're talking to your teacher and getting some feedback from them about the work that you're doing here on these videos. But here the claim is, Christians and Muslims both agree that merchants are an essential part of the economy. So we have a similarity between the views of Christians and Muslims. And so Smith took documents 1, 4, and 5, put them together to show this similarity. Now, I thought Smith brought up an excellent point yesterday. So especially when you're thinking about similarities and differences, if you're having to compare and contrast something in an essay, you're not going to find a similarity or difference from just one document. You got to use at least 2 documents. And he does this here. If you notice, documents 1 and 4 are from a Christian point of view, showing that merchants are an essential part of the economy. And then document 5, from an Islamic point of view, also showing that merchants are an essential part of the economy. So all 3 documents together prove that historical claim. So notice here, remember on this essay, you're going to have 5 documents. You have to use at least 4 of them to support your claim. And he's already used 3 in this nice, well-written paragraph. So he's almost there. The second one is another similarity, which, by the way, totally cool. If you're doing a compare and contrast essay and you've got two similarities or two differences, you're totally fine. If we're doing a continuity and change, you've got just continuities or just changes, that is fine as well. But here, he has a similarity that Christians and Muslims agree that merchants should be honest in their dealings. And again, he's got two documents this time, document 2 from a Christian, document 3 from a Muslim, and they're showing again that similarity. Okay, so it's a very quick and easy way to write those documents. And now he's used all 5 documents to support 2 different claims, and that is great. By the way, I get a question a lot from my students, and I've heard from other students around the country as well, is that, are you allowed to use the same document for 2 different claims? So, because notice here, Smith used, what was it, 1, 3, and 4, I'm sorry, 1, 4, and 5 in this one, and then 2 and 3 in this. So he didn't double up with any documents, but you are certainly welcome to do that. If document 4, for example, supports this claim and this claim, then by all means, talk about it twice. You're welcome to do that. But remember that if you talk about document 4 here, and then you talk about another part of it here, you do not get credit for using 2 documents because you've only used 1. You've only used document 4. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Don't think you can talk about it twice and get credit for using 2 documents. That's not how this rubric works. But remember, you've got to use at least 4 documents to support a claim, but you guys, you're going to use all 5 documents to support your claim. That way, in case you mess up on one, and there's always, every time there's a DBQ, there's always that kind of one weird wonky document that just doesn't seem to make sense or fit in there, but you're going to try that one anyway. And hey, if you mess up on it, that's fine because you've already used the other 4 correctly. So you're good to go. You're going to get the points for using 4 documents to support your argument. So please, please, please make sure you use all the documents. I hate to see it when I'm grading AP tests, at the AP reading, where a student uses 6 documents, back in the old one, use 6 out of 7, use 6, messed up on 1, so only got 5 correct and doesn't get that point. So make sure you're using all the documents. Also, one other thing that Smith did here, and it's kind of a small thing, but it can make a difference, is that he's putting the document numbers in the paragraph. I'm just going to tell you a little tip of the trick of the trade here. Okay, when readers are grading these, it makes their life so much easier when you put the document numbers there. You are welcome to refer the documents by the author's name. Like here, he says Thomas Aquinas. You can put the title of the document. That's totally fine. But if you would, please, it helps the readers out to put the document number in there somewhere. You can even put it like in parentheses after you're done talking about it. That's totally fine too. But it just kind of helps the reader see it that you're talking about it. Now, technically, you can never mention the number 2, but if you talk about Thomas Aquinas, the reader will know you're talking about document 2, and yes, you will get credit for it. But it makes the reader's job a whole lot easier if you put the document number. It puts them in a good frame of mind, and you want them happy when they're reading your essay. The same kind of goes for spelling and grammar. Notice on the rubric, it says nothing about spelling and grammar. You are not going to lose points if you put a comma in the wrong place. But just keep in mind, the readers of the AP test do not know who you are. Your name is not on your test. They don't know how smart you are. They don't know how hard you've worked this year in this class. Show them how smart you are and show them how hard you've worked by using good grammar and spelling, and it'll help you on your exam, I promise. Okay, let's do a warm-up for today. And what I'd like for you to do is, there is a link down below me right there. You might have to click the See More button. It's titled Access Helpful Resources Here, and it's a link to a Google Drive that we've set up. In there, you've got copies of all the PowerPoints we've done over the last couple of weeks. You've got copies of some of the homework we've done. And under the review files, so make sure you click on review files, there's a document called CCOT Review Chart. And I'll give you a second to download it. If you want to go ahead and pause me now, that might be a good idea because I'm about to start talking about it. Pause me until you've got it downloaded. If you want to print it out, great. That way you can write on it. If you just want to have it in front of you and then jot some notes on a piece of paper, that's totally fine too. But go ahead and title it Eurasia from 1200 to 1450, because that's kind of what we're looking at today, is the continuities and changes brought about by the Mongols from 1200 to 1450. And really, we're only going to look at the first page of this today. I gave you both because I feel like this chart could help you as you're studying for this test and as you're reviewing and as you're trying to organize all your information. Because remember, this year's test, you are allowed to use your notes, but you only have 45 minutes to write this DBQ. That does not give you a lot of time, very little time at all, to go through all the notes that you've written this year. You probably need to organize and simplify your notes. And using a chart like this, I think could actually help you. So today I want to practice using this. If it works well for you, great. Make some more of these charts for other time periods and other regions. And you don't need to put a ton of detail into it. Put main ideas, put main events that'll help jog your memory if there happens to be a DBQ about that time period. All right, so hopefully at this point you've had it downloaded. And if you would, we're only going to look at the first column right here, the one that says basic features at the beginning of the period. So take a couple minutes. You're going to want to pause me again. And I want you to just jot down some bullet point notes, maybe some technologies and innovations that are important in this time period, some cultural developments that we see, and governance as well. So look back at your notes from the class, look at your textbook if you need, look back at the last couple of videos we've done. Because like I said, all this Unit 1 stuff that Smith and I have been covering would fit perfectly here. So go ahead and pause me now. I'll give you a couple minutes. When you're ready, unpause, and we'll go over some answers. Ready? Pause. Okay, possible answers you could have put down. And by the way, there are a ton of things that you could have put down. But I focused on just a few because I know that we're about to look at the Mongols and I want to think about, what the Mongols affected. But if you have other stuff, that's great too. Okay, big technologies of the time. Stirrups for horses. Yes, stirrups had been around Afro-Eurasia already. But I mentioned that because, as you may remember, horses are kind of a big deal for the Mongols. The whole riding on horses and bows and arrows and all that. Also remember that, yes, gunpowder is being used in China in this time period, but there are no firearms or cannons yet. Okay, but we'll get to that later as well. As far as cultural developments go, we've talked a lot already over the last week about religions, especially on trade routes. We know that Buddhism has spread into East Asia, from India into China, essentially, but also into Japan, Korea, and other areas of East Asia. We know that Islam spread from the Arabian Peninsula into South Asia, Southeast Asia, North Africa, and really all over the Indian Ocean basin. And then Christianity in Europe. And we mentioned this the other day that at this point in history, you've got Roman Catholics mainly in Western Europe, you got Eastern Orthodox in Eastern Europe. Protestants are not a thing yet, they're coming later. There are a few pockets of like Coptic Christians in Africa, but the large majority of Christians at this point in history are in Europe. And then when it comes to governance, we've talked about all the big empires and kingdoms. Again, the Song Dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate in the Islamic world. Also, we haven't talked Russia yet because there's not really a Russia yet, but there is a small kingdom that is beginning to grow, that is eventually going to become Russia, that is out there. If you didn't put that in your chart, that's fine, because honestly, it's not a huge part of the story in 1200, but as we know, it's going to become a huge part of the story later on. And if you put something about decentralization or feudalism in Europe, that would be great as well. All right, so now we've kind of set up what are things looking like. Now we can start talking about the changes and the continuities from this time period. Put your chart off to the side for a while. We are going to come back to it though at the end of this lesson. All right, so what do you need to know about the Mongols? Oh, so many things. I wish we had several class periods to go over this, but I'm gonna have to kind of narrow it down a bit, sadly. But so we're not gonna get into all of the gruesome ways that the Mongols invaded cities and killed lots of people and all that, but let's focus on the trade routes and all that sort of thing first. Okay, as far as who the Mongols are, remember that they are one of those nomadic groups from Central Asia. They're probably the most famous, but they are just one of many of them. And we know that these nomadic groups have been really important through history, going back to ancient history so far. As we talked about in the last couple of videos, they are big in making sure that trade is continuing across Asia and also the transfer of knowledge across Asia. But the Mongols are being led by Genghis Khan. Now, if you look at the childhood of Genghis Khan, doesn't seem like he'd be the type that would be able to unify the Mongols. Remember, his father was actually murdered by a rival clan when he was a young child. So his mother raised him. He returns back to his clan and is able to unify all the different Mongol tribes together, which no one had really ever done before. Through his sheer force of will and personality, he's able to unify the Mongols and then, of course, begin to grow this new Mongol empire. Okay, take a time out here for a second. I want to think about theories of history. I've never been a big believer in the idea of like the great man or great woman of history. A lot of times when we teach history, we talk about these like amazing men or women who changed the world for good and also for bad. There's been plenty of people that have done obviously very bad things in this world. But oftentimes when you look at those people's impact on the world, there's bigger forces at play than just one person. Take, for example, like the Wright brothers. Okay, the Wright brothers are given credit for inventing the airplane. But guys, there were plenty of people before the Wright brothers that were trying to work on flight, and the Wright brothers used all of their research and their ideas to build their first airplane. And of course, the Wright brothers model didn't fly for very long, so it took other scientists and engineers many years later to get modern aircraft like we know. So, okay, yes, airplanes have definitely changed the way we live, no doubt about it. But the Wright brothers weren't the only ones working on it. I mean, kind of consider this. If the Wright brothers never existed, we'd still have airplanes. Life would have gone on pretty much like normal. So again, we look at these like amazing men and women through history and say they changed the world, but really there's bigger forces at play. But you could actually argue that Genghis Khan might want to be those few people that did change the world on his own. Now, there are bigger forces at play, no doubt, but he's able to unify the Mongol nation and then begins the conquest of almost all of Asia. And guys, that's insane. No one takes over all of Asia, okay? During this quarantine, my kids have been wanting to play Risk a lot, which is cool. I like Risk and all. And my 8-year-old always tries to take over Asia like it's the first thing that he does. And it never, ever works. Even if he gets it, he loses it the next turn when his big brother takes it from him. Okay. No one takes over Asia in Risk or in world history. And again, okay, yes, the Mongols didn't take over all of Asia, but they took a large chunk of it. They defeated the Song dynasty in China, the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East. They conquered their young Russian kingdom as well. And some have argued that, yes, all three of those kingdoms and dynasties were kind of on the decline already before the Mongols. Okay, fine. But still, the Mongols defeated all of them. They were very skilled in horseback riding. They could ride faster than any army. They could shoot bows and arrows while riding horses, and extremely deadly. And they were extremely ruthless as well. I wish we had time to get into the stories of all the things the Mongols did, but you got to understand their reputation spread all over Asia. So even if, people in one area heard the Mongols were coming, it's almost as if the Mongols had defeated them before they even arrived because everyone got scared and just simply gave up. Okay, so you can see here the map of, like I said, this new Mongol empire that is created. Now, You probably learned about the different khanates in your class and all of that. I wouldn't worry too much about it. That is important. But again, we need to think about the big picture of what's going on during this time of the Pax Mongolia, where we actually see an increase in long distance trade, especially along the Silk Road, but also in the Indian Ocean and around the Sahara Desert as well, as part of this larger trade network. Because you need to remember, the Mongols weren't really producers of anything. They weren't out there buying and selling goods. That wasn't their thing. But they were very happy to sponsor long distance trade because of course tax money to them. And remember, I've said this a couple of times already, that when you have strong centralized governments, you generally see more long distance trade. And the Mongols are no exception to that. Here we have a very strong empire, a very powerful leader. No one's messing with the Mongols. So if you're a merchant that is traveling across these trade routes, you actually can feel fairly safe. No one's going to attack you. No one wants to run afoul of the Mongol authorities. So with an increase in trade, we know what comes with that, right? And we'll talk about more of this in a second, but spread of religion, culture, ideas, disease as well, as we're going to see here in a second. But you also have to consider where merchants went, especially on these land routes. Remember that oftentimes merchants didn't travel the entire distance of the Silk Road. It was extremely rare from someone in East Asia to travel all the way to Europe or Europe to East Asia. You remember the stories of Marco Polo or Ibn Battuta? Well, they're kind of the exception to the rule. They're important because they were some of the few people that traveled all over this area. Most merchants would only travel small distances and usually the same route over and over. But you start to see a larger migration of people as well because of the way the Mongols governed. Remember, as the Mongols came through and conquered areas, they were on the lookout for people with talents. If you were a talented engineer or accountant or military leader, they used those talents. They wanted those used for their benefit. But generally speaking, you were not allowed to stay in your area. So if they found you in East Asia and you showed a certain talent for military leadership, they would often ship you off to the Middle East and have you work there. So now we have a group of people traveling longer distances than ever before to new areas that have never been seen before. So again, we know what's going to come with that also: spread of religion, ideas, disease, etc. So this time period, as the Mongols are conquering, is sometimes known as the Pax Mongolia. Because yes, you do see an increase in trade. You do see in some cases benefits to merchants. So hey, living under Mongol rule is not all terrible. There was money to be made, as long as you're okay with, the Mongols coming in and destroying your village, burning down your house, killing everyone you love. Besides that, though, things are cool. All right, so let's talk about the results of all of this. And before we do, you've probably already read the joke here on the right. And, one of the problems with doing this like online teaching is that I can't see your responses to this. So I'm just going to assume that everyone right now is laughing uproariously at my hilarious pun. Get it? Step dad. I know. You're all just doubled over in laughter. You've got tears coming down your eyes. It's almost like I can imagine y'all right now. Actually, no. If you're like my students, you're probably groaning and rolling your eyes right now at me and this terrible dad joke. And that's completely fair. I probably deserve that. But let's talk about the results of this Mongol conquest of almost all of Asia. All right, first off, through trade routes, we know that there is this movement of technology and knowledge, especially into Europe. Remember, the Mongols never conquer Europe. They get close. They're right there on the edge. but they never conquer. But still, that knowledge from the Middle East. So for example, medical knowledge, knowledge of mathematics, Arabic numerals make their way into Europe. Gunpowder from China, those ideas start to make their way to Europe, and Europeans start to figure out how to make cannons and guns from that. We also, of course, see the spread of religious ideas because, again, that's what happens on trade routes when new people meet up. But here's what's interesting, is that we don't see a lot of like mass conversions to any particular religion. Remember, the Mongols were not very interested in spreading their religion. Honestly, when they conquered a new area, they were pretty tolerant of all religions because their idea was, look, just keep worshiping and doing what you want. Because the Mongols knew that when you conquer an area, if you allow people to keep their religious practices and holidays, they're less likely to revolt. When you start taking away things like religion that are really important to many people, that's when you start to get angry citizens that are going to start revolting. Plus, the Mongols were kind of open to all kinds of different religious ideas. You see some Mongol leaders who convert to Islam and Christianity and Buddhism because they had this idea of like, well, one of them has to be right, so let's just cover our bases and convert to all of them. So you do see religious ideas spread. People in Europe find out more about Muslims and Buddhists. People in East Asia find out more about Islam. There's a really interesting example of ideas of Christianity spreading to the Middle East. Because think about one of the central ideas of Christianity is the importance of the birth of Jesus. Christians hold that up as a major holiday. You know, there's this big holiday in December where it happens. There's stories told about it. There's paintings of the birth of Jesus, the three kings, all those stories. And so when those stories make their way into the Middle East, you even see some artwork depicting the birth of Muhammad in kind of the same way, like the birth of Muhammad in a manger with the three kings and all of that. So again, kind of this Christian influence in the Middle East without everybody converting to a particular religion. So at the end of the day, you still see mainly Christianity in Europe, Islam in the Middle East and around the Indian Ocean, Buddhism in East Africa, but the ideas begin to mix through those trade routes. Obviously, we're going to see some new empires and dynasties because all the old ones are now gone. And after the Mongols finally leave, you start to see, like, for example, the Ming dynasty in China, replacing the Yuan dynasty that the Mongols had established. But probably one of the biggest effects of Mongol rule is, of course, the spread of the Black Death or the plague, the bubonic plague. Now, you're familiar with this, you know that it's spread through trade. And a lot of times people focus on the results in Europe because, yes, Europe was definitely hit by the plague, probably worse than any other area, killing a very large percentage of the population. But it wasn't just Europe. For some reason, students sometimes get this idea that just people in Europe died. But we know that's not the case. I mean, that just doesn't even really make sense because of all the trade routes going on. It spread all through Afro-Eurasia. There were outbreaks of it all across, especially in China as well. So this was something that everybody was dealing with. And it comes about because of the increased trade that the Mongols promoted. So it wasn't that the Mongols were trying to spread the Black Death, because in fact, it pretty much decimated the Mongols as well. Well, I say the Mongols weren't trying to spread the plague, but also remember, there were a few times when they kind of practiced biological warfare by taking bodies that had died from the plague and using catapults to fling them over city walls in some of the cities they were trying to siege. So, okay, maybe they did a little bit. But generally speaking, the plague spreads these trade routes that the Mongols had been encouraging. And then another result, and I put a question mark at this one because this is debatable among historians, but there are some that would argue that the ascendancy of Europe, we know that right now, before the Mongols, I've said this before, Europe was kind of the backwoods area of Afro-Eurasia. It was kind of off there in the northwest corner. There weren't that many trade routes. There weren't very strong government systems. But think about the benefits to Europe from Mongol rule. They weren't conquered like other areas of Afro-Eurasia. And all that knowledge I was mentioning a second ago is making its way into Europe. So you can make the argument that Mongol conquering of Afro-Eurasia led to things like the Renaissance. It's not a direct connection, but it is kind of there. So we need to consider that as well. All right, so what I'd like for you to do now is to get that CCOT chart back out that you started at the beginning. And what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and fill out the rest of that first page. Like I said, we're not going to do the second page today because I think that's probably too much to do today. And really, so far today, we focused on technology, culture, and governance. That's really all we've talked about. So doing the second page would be a little difficult. But I'd like you to take some time. This might take you 10, 15 minutes, but you're going to pause me, take as long as you need, get out your old notes, get out your textbook, rewatch this video if you want. You can rewind it and go back. And now I want you to think about Afro-Eurasia in 1450. So on that column, the third column where it says basic features at the end of the period, think about Afro-Eurasia in 1450. And then let's think about the key continuities and changes. What changed over this time period? What stayed the same? And then also let's think about the reasons for those changes and continuities. Let's do a little analysis with it as well. So go ahead, pause me. And through again, the magic of video, I will be here when you return and we can go over the answers. I will see y'all when you are done. Okay, I put a lot of stuff on here. And again, you may have things that are different. That is totally fine. But let's go over some of this really quickly. Technology. If you think about a continuity, that technological ideas and innovations spread through trade, that is something we see through world history from ancient times up until today. But it definitely was true from 1200 to 1450. But a change, you could mention the change of the beginnings of creation of firearms and cannons. And the reason why that happened, think about the reasons why, is that again, the Mongols are bringing together these networks of trade and they're increasing the spread of knowledge, especially to Europe. When it comes to cultural developments, we talked about religions already at the beginning. And really, when you look at the end of the period, like I said, for the most part, where religions are really didn't change very much. So if we think about key continuities, there was not a mass conversion for any particular religion. But as I said already, you do see some blending of religious ideas, especially in the example of art that I gave. You also think about culture, you think about food. Plants are also moving around Afro-Eurasia more than ever before because it's increased trade. It's not like the Columbian Exchange that, of course, we'll get to later, because that's a huge moment where food and plants and animals are spreading. But think of it kind of a miniature version of that. But again, it really does go back to the fact that the Mongols were just simply not interested in forcing conversion among the people they conquered. That kind of makes them an outlier in world history, because if you think about other empires that have spread over time, then we generally do see forced conversion. We saw this already with the spread of Islam to certain areas. Some of it was through trade, but some of it was through forced conversion. Think about when Europeans first arrived in the Americas and been converting a lot of Native Americans to Christianity. We see that a lot through history, but the Mongols are the exception there. And then when you think about governance, we already talked about the major empires and dynasties and all of that. And yes, at the end of the period, we have some changes. We have a new Ming dynasty. If you're thinking about the Islamic world, you may have mentioned the Safavids and the Ottomans. And yeah, they're kind of around in the 1450s. They're going to become a big deal later on. But after Mongol conquest, you do see a lot of disorder for a while there before these new kingdoms do emerge. For China, you had the end of the Song dynasty, the Mongols set up the Yuan dynasty, there's an overthrow of that into the Ming dynasty. It flows fairly straightforward. It gets a little bit messier in the Islamic world. But you do start to see some stable kingdoms emerging in Europe. We've talked a lot about feudalism, and with the plague, that does, in a lot of ways, kind of end that feudal system. So as Europe is kind of recovering from the plague, and again, they didn't have to deal with Mongol conquest, you start to see the beginnings of modern European countries like we know it. Not exactly, because it gets a lot messier later on, but we're starting to see more stable government systems and kingdoms in Europe. And of course, the reason for all this change is because, like I said, the Mongols took over all of Asia. And yes, I know they didn't take over all of Asia, but close enough. It's still pretty freaking impressive. All right, so what did we learn about today? Okay, first off, key takeaways. Yes, the Mongols wrecked shop all across Asia, for sure. But we need to think about the increase in trade that comes to Afro-Eurasia. Also, I want you to start thinking about how you're going to organize your notes. Again, if this chart helped you, great. Keep using it. If you want to modify it somehow, whatever's going to help you best for when you get that DBQ and you need like a really quick look at your notes. Because again, remember, for the DBQ rubric, you do have to bring in outside information. In fact, you can get 2 points this year if you have 2 pieces of outside information. And so it might be helpful to look in your notes, but you're not going to have a long time to flip through your notebook forever. You need to have things organized in your head and also in your notes. So we'll go over some other strategies over the next couple of weeks of ways you can do that. But just start thinking about how you want to spend this next month or so organizing all of your notes. All right, you do have some homework for tonight. I actually put it in that same Google Drive that you used earlier for the chart. It's entitled 2.2 Homework. It is going to be a short answer question, 3 parts to it. You're going to be looking at these 2 pictures. If you have no idea what's going on in these 2 pictures, don't worry about it. There's a description in the homework, so you'll be fine with it. But Smith is going to go over all of that with you tomorrow. All right, one more thing before we go today. I've been talking a lot of religion. I've been thinking about that this week, especially, this is kind of a time period of the year with some pretty big major religious observances. Easter this past weekend, in the middle of Passover, Ramadan is coming up. And one big theme I think about, whether you're talking about a religious celebration or even a secular one as well, is the theme of community. That anytime we have holidays, like I said, whether religious or non-religious, community is a huge, huge part of them. And I feel like right now, that's hard for some of us, It's hard to experience that community with others. Yes, you're spending a lot of time with the people in your house, but you probably haven't seen your friends or your extended family in a while. And it's hard to feel connected with them. So I guess my word of encouragement today is to just take a second at some point tonight or tomorrow and reach out to somebody who is not in your house with you right now. Figure out a way that you can do a video call or just a regular phone call, or maybe just something as simple as a text to see how everybody's doing. Because we need that sense of community right now, especially when all of us are going through something as difficult as the coronavirus and having to stay at home for it. So just a word of encouragement, think about community. It'll help others. It's going to make you feel better as well. And it's going to kind of help you to re-encourage you. And that's my hope for each and every one of you. All right, y'all have a good evening. I will see y'all again on Thursday. Smith is going to be with y'all tomorrow night. Take care.